Welcome to Every Child Belongs. I'm so happy to have Dr. Robert Crosby, Executive Director of Reach Hurting Kids, with us today. Robert is also a professor of psychology at California Baptist University. He has served with kids and youth in the local church for decades. He also did a huge 10-year research project on the church and child development. And I'm looking forward to what he has to share with us today. Robert, I'm so glad to have you here.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. And we're talking all about how we want every kid to belong. And a lot of times when people think of this, we think of kids with disabilities who are neurodivergent, but also kids who've experienced trauma often have trouble belonging. But before we get into that, what else? What did I miss? What else do you want to tell our listeners about yourself and who you
Well,
are?
sure, absolutely. So, I've worked in kids and youth ministry for a long, long time. A little bit vocationally, but mainly as a volunteer. It's something that I've always been passionate about. Worked in education for a long time in special education, and now at the university level, teaching in research methods. So basically, this came out of a lengthy research program, working with a colleague at California Baptist for well over 10 years, and it kind of led us in this direction. This was where the need was. This is where grant funding was, and this is where we felt called to invest our time.
Yeah. And what came out of this, right, is Reach Hurting Kids Institute came out of your research,
Well,
correct?
it absolutely did.
And through Reach Hurting Kids, I have been blessed to see the courses, the workshops that you've created, and a lot of the other resources. And really, you exist to help churches. Well, why don't you tell me? Why do you exist, Robert? What's Reach Hurting Kids about?
Right. Well, so our mission statement is to empower the church to reach hurting kids. It's exactly what you're saying. One of the biggest findings that came out of our research program was that a kid's behavior was really the biggest obstacle to them feeling a sense of belonging at the church. And we had a large study where we looked at all these different variables. We're kind of asking the question, what can churches do to help kids belong? And so we looked at different facets of the ministry program. But what we saw was that in statistics is called a level one or a child level variable, were the biggest predictors. And so you have the child's gender. Female children tend to feel connected more than male children do. And then the family background, or are they from a Christian family? Are they involved in the church? Which is kind of makes sense when you think about it. But really the number one variable was their behavior. If a child had what we now know to be trauma-related behaviors, they in general were much more likely to feel like they were on the outside. I'm not part of this church. I'm not cared for here, and I don't belong. But there were a handful of churches, really out of many, 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 where this wasn't the trend, where even though a child came in maybe from a non-Christian home, from a family that wasn't involved, maybe both boys and girls, and someone who has these trauma-related behaviors, said, I absolutely do feel like I belong to this church. I absolutely do feel loved and cared for here. I'm growing here. And so that asked the question, that caused us to ask the question, well, what's different there? What are they doing, in our opinion, what are they doing right that is creating this space? And so that veered our research in a whole different direction as we went to those churches and asked questions and did interviews and made observations to learn what were the best practices that created spaces where kids that are really struggling with behaviors and their emotions were able to connect and belong.
Well, and I want to dig into this research because it's so interesting. You came up with such practical, tested strategies that churches can use, but you mentioned trauma-related behavior a couple times. Give us some examples of trauma-related behavior.
Yeah, certainly. So we talk about these four overarching categories of behaviors or symptoms: feeling unsafe, feeling dysregulated, feeling rejected, feeling worthless or devalued. And so if a child feels unsafe, they're going to be doing things to protect themselves. They may not want to be involved in something. They might literally hide or run away. They might put up other kinds, it could be feeling emotionally unsafe. I don't want to answer the questions because if I get them wrong, I might feel embarrassed or ashamed. A child feeling dysregulated, that means emotionally kind of out of control of their emotions. And a child that can stem from being afraid. I walk into an environment, I'm worried what might happen to me, so I'm on edge, and if something feels like a threat, I might explode. There might be an emotional outburst. They can't handle some sense of frustration. Maybe they're hungry, and snack is delayed, and so they worry that I'm going to be deprived, or I'm not going to have what I need. And so you see those big emotional outbursts. A child who's struggling with feelings of rejection might say, "I'm going to preemptively reject you first. I'm going to treat other kids or leaders with cruelty or with unkind comments. I might refuse to be part of things. Hey, do you want to join this? No, I don't want to because I'm rejected." And that can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then feeling devalued, I'm worthless, I'm no good, I can't do things. And so they don't want to try. You say, "Hey, do you want to read the Bible verse?" Absolutely not. It can come across like defiance, but really it's them feeling like I'm worthless, I'm incompetent, I can't do these things. Example, maybe you have a game where you're looking at who can look up the verses the fastest, or some kind of a trivia game, and the kid loses the game and they start to cry and there's this complete meltdown, and you think, what is this about? This is no stakes. They're not even getting candy for this. Why is this child so upset? But it's resonating with these deep feelings of worthlessness that are now being brought to the surface. So there's many, many, many behaviors we could see, but those are kind of the overarching categories that we'll talk about. And we frame it in that way because it gives us a starting point for how to help the child in that situation.
Right. And I'm just thinking, you talked about a kid who is defiant, but maybe they're feeling unworthy. And if we are looking at the kid as defiant versus looking at them as feeling unworthy and not belonging, we're going to respond in much different ways.
Well, that's exactly it. And a lot of our training we do with leaders centers around changing the way we're thinking about the behaviors. We talk about the underlying feeling. So we say we want to respond to an underlying feeling rather than reacting to a behavior, so we can get to the root cause and actually help the kids succeed. And oftentimes it's not that hard. Because, folks will think, well, we don't have psychologists in our ministry. We don't have occupational therapists or mental health professionals or we don't have these people. So how can we address these needs? And there are some there are some extreme cases that really do need people with a high level of expertise. But if I were to just put a number on it, I'd say 95% of the behaviors that kids are being sent out of the ministry for, or they're just feeling excluded or left out because of, are things that we could handle. Very simple outbursts are a very simple example. A child has an emotional outburst. It's scary. It's confusing. And so the natural instinct, go get mom or dad, go get grandma, go get who brought them, get them out. They're unsafe to us, or we're just overwhelmed. And most of the time, just with a few simple steps, we can calm them down, right? Those don't last forever. Some last longer than others. A child, something triggers something and they scream or throw something or have a fit, and we can say, hey, Luke, just let's go for a walk, bud, or let's just go outside for a minute. They go outside and they walk around for a minute. Hey, tell me what happened. Well, they said this to me. Usually it's something you didn't know happened. And they say, well, I lost a gaga ball, and this other person called me a name or laughed at me. They laughed at me when I lost. And so that's triggering feelings of worthlessness and rejection, right? I'm bad at this. I'm not cared for. And they had the outburst, and you say, man, that must have really hurt your feelings. Yeah, it did. Maybe they tear up a little bit. And a couple of minutes later, do you feel like you're okay to go back in? Do you feel like you need more time? I'm okay. And they go back in and they're fine the rest of the service. And it's that easy. It's not always easy, but many times just thinking about it differently and making a slight change in how we respond is the difference between them staying put in the ministry, feeling loved in that moment of vulnerability, in their moment of need. The message is the church is a place where I'm accepted. And instead of I'm not welcome here, I'm not good enough to be here, and I feel rejected, not just by the church. And this is another research finding, is a lot of times the church is kind of a proxy for how a child experiences God. And so when they feel accepted by the church, by extension, I feel accepted by God. And then unfortunately, when I feel rejected by the church, I'm feeling rejected by God. So oftentimes just simple things we can do with a little bit of training, a little bit of psychoeducation can make that difference.
Would you say, because what you said was, so often we'll call the parent, whoever brought them to church.
Yeah.
Do you see people like giving up too soon?
I think so, but they're responding to a different. They're reacting to the behavior, and they're coming at it from maybe an outdated or just not a fully informed understanding of what's happening. We can take things personally. I mean, working with kids is hard.
Yes.
Post-COVID in particular, a lot of churches are understaffed. They don't have enough volunteers, and so people are strained. And so when you see big behaviors you're not prepared for, they're not, they're not setting out to reject a child from Christianity. They're doing the best they can, and they might see this as, okay, well, they're being defiant. Strike one, strike two. They're seeing this as a conscious choice to be bad, and or they might see a child looking for attention and say, well, they're just trying to get attention, so we don't give them that attention, instead of thinking, here's a child who needs attention. And wow, they're in the church, and what an opportunity to teach the lesson that when I'm in need of care and attention, that's where my church is, that's where my God is. So I think so. When we've worked with churches to help equip them, that's something we hear is the frequency in which kids are being sent out of the children's service is much lower. And so I talked to a pastor, and this was maybe 2 or 3 months after they equipped the team. And she said before the training, we'd send about 8 kids a month back to the service. And now it's 2. And so it's not perfect. I mean, it was an hour and 15-minute training. You're not going to make everyone a psychologist in that time. But it was a 75% reduction in children who were potentially feeling rejected by the church. So it just took a little bit of education to make such a big difference.
Yeah, and your training is so easy to execute. And let's talk about it at the end.
Sure.
But it's so easy to execute. And look at the change that it made from 8 to 2. We'd like to get it to 0, but 8 to 2. Kids being sent back to their parents is a huge improvement. So you said, you were doing your research on churches, and then you found some churches that were really doing it differently. So what were they doing differently?
So when I mentioned those 4 symptoms, those broad symptoms of trauma, feeling dysregulated, feeling unsafe, feeling rejected, feeling devalued or worthless, they're doing the opposite. So, what do we do to help a child feel regulated? And that can it's fascinating because each church we looked at kind of had their own sort of take on it. And some of them knew the trauma literature, and so they were stepping into it. We're going to work on emotion regulation. Others didn't know the language, but they figured out this works for the kids we're trying to reach. So they've never had education in trauma or special education, but when we bring in the kids to the community and we do X, Y, and Z, they seem good. So talking about safety, there was a ministry in an area that was a little bit dangerous. And so children would come in worried about their safety. And at this church, the children were in a separate building. And so they had a kid who would act out because he felt unsafe. And so they put him in charge of locking the doors. So once all the kids, the bus would come, drop the kids off, and all the kids would come inside, and it would say, okay, Ethan, everyone's here. And he would walk around the building and lock all the doors. And now he knew this building is secure. And it was funny, one time his mom tried to pick him up early, and he said, she didn't have luck with that. He knew not even my mother could get in the building, and he felt safe. So that was a very simple example, helping kids feel regulated. I talked about just taking a kid aside for a minute, taking them for a walk is huge. The way the program is structured, worship can be used really powerfully to create spaces where kids feel peace and they feel emotionally under control. A lot of times we kind of assume that kids all want this loud, crazy, wild, wacky, fun space. The worship songs all need to be kid friendly. I put that in quotes if you can't see me. Because we think kid friendly means simple lyrics, maybe even childish at some level, certainly upbeat. And if we were to come in with something contemplative or reverent, they wouldn't respond to that. Certainly a child with ADHD. And it's often the opposite of what we'd expect. And when a church would create a reverent space in worship, oftentimes the children with ADHD are the first ones there in a prayer circle, kneeling and experiencing the peace they don't experience elsewhere. So just a couple quick examples. We have an entire book full of them, many. But just a couple things off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's great. I love, you said the kid who went around and they had him lock all the doors and check it, and you said simple. Yeah, I mean, I guess it very easy to execute, but I mean, it took somebody a moment to just stop and say, okay, what's the kid's need? He feels unsafe. What would make him feel safe? Well, him actually locking every door, so he's certain that it's locked. I mean, I think that's brilliant and such an example. Yeah, it doesn't have to be rocket science.
hmm
I know
And
you're a
they arrive there
scientist,
by
not
looking at the underlying feeling. I feel unsafe, and you could say, well, you're being squirrely, or you don't want to be here, so you're choosing to misbehave. And the same church was she was kind of a savant at helping kids feel truly, truly valued. And so the children all had leadership roles at some capacity. So that was his leadership role. Others would be involved in maybe leading worship or doing the PowerPoint, or there was someone who was in charge of prayer. He was sort of the chaplain of the group. And there were very high expectations for them. They were expected to be there. They had a Sunday and a Wednesday service, and they were expected to be there every Sunday and every Wednesday. And these are kids coming on a bus. Their families aren't part of the church, and they stepped up. And they felt so. The team felt so valued. The leaders would talk about, she's always there for us. This is the children's pastor checking in with us, giving us what we need, saying thank you. So you saw kind of across the board the kids, the leaders, everyone involved feeling, I'm very valued here. I'm part of this community, and they wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
So this leader did it not just to the kids, she did it to her volunteers too.
Yeah, that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot in our book. So I was kind of talking over you, apologize. So the book, Trauma-Informed Children's Ministry, A Practical Guide to Reaching Hurting Kids. So this is just an entire 200-page book of strategies to do this, and kind of the why behind the strategies. And I think it's the last chapter, chapter 10, is focused on trauma-informed team development. And a lot of times we're really focused on the children, but in a church, unless it's a tiny church, the volunteers are going to be the primary touch point for the kids. So it's not just equipping them, and that is really important to help them be educated and equipped to be successful, because no one wants, just like the kids, right? The volunteers don't want to feel like a failure. But helping them feel safe, helping them feel regulated, feeling connected, feeling valued. So knowing that you can do it, giving them choices, right? We have the children choices that helps them feel empowered. The volunteers have meaningful choices. Emotional safety we talk about. So what does it mean for a volunteer to feel emotionally safe? Can I go to the children's pastor and confide something or express weakness or challenges? I'm struggling with the kids' behavior in this space without being afraid of feeling judged, or being kicked out of the ministry. Does the children's pastor, can I say this person knows me and cares for me? Do they know my name? Do they know my kids? If I'm in the hospital, are they going to at least check on me? If my kid's in the hospital, are they going to at least check on us? Or in some cases, and the ones in the study, they would be there. I talked to a volunteer who wasn't even, their kid was no longer in the ministry, and they were no longer serving, but the children's pastor showed up at the hospital when the kid was injured.
Wow.
And so they felt like, this is, like, I'm so loved, I'm so valued, I'm so known. The children's pastor would, when they would go to recruit, because recruitment's an issue now.
Yes.
It certainly wasn't, I'm going to stand up on stage and say, we're going to have to close childcare unless people volunteer, and sort of try to guilt or put out this blanket request, that it's easy. In psychology, we talk about diffuse responsibility in social psychology. And the more people you ask, the less likely it is someone will volunteer. So they have an experiment where you have a person pretending to be injured on the side of the road, and the more people on the sidewalk, the less likely someone helps. But when there's one person, it's just kind of on you. Or when you do CPR training, right, it's you call 911. And so in the same way, you can't just say, church, help, or we have to close childcare. I'm purposely using that because also when people think of it in those terms, who's excited about that versus ministry? Separate point. But when you go to someone and say, Kim, I've seen you in the church. I've seen your heart for service. And I see that you have a deep wisdom and you understand the scriptures. You're always in the scriptures. And I have a group of 4th and 5th graders who are asking incredible questions, and they want to learn, and they want to be in the scriptures. They need someone with wisdom to guide them, who has your heart. How would you feel about coming in and working with them on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock? I noticed you're usually in the 10 o'clock service. You'd come in early. I've got a little boy named Matt, and he was just asking me about what the Bible says here. This is the kind of conversations we're having, and I could only imagine how much they would grow if you stepped into this role. Would you prayerfully consider this? I think you would be incredible, and we would be beyond blessed to have you serve in this space, right? The likelihood of that person responding is going to obviously be immensely greater than, okay, we're going to have to close childcare. If no one steps up, you're going to have to bring your kids into service. So, somebody do it, right? It's an entirely different situation.
As you're saying it, like I'm sitting here going, yes, Robert. Yes,
Right.
I'll do it. Oh, wait a minute. You're on the West Coast. I'm on the Midwest.
Right.
It won't work.
And it has to be sincere, right? It can't come, you can't just sort of have like a script. I mean, that'd probably still
Right.
be better than standing up but knowing that, I mean, that's part of being known. You want to, just like the children, they want to feel known. They want to feel valued. We as adults want to feel known and valued. And when people are quitting, they say, oh, they're feeling burnt out. And I think if they're feeling burnt out, it's not because some really do push it to the limits, but a lot of times it's not so much that they really have been pushed to their limits of service. It's that they're just not feeling loved. They're not feeling valued. They're not feeling connected. They're not feeling safe in some way. And so why am I going to make this sacrifice? It's easier not to volunteer. It's nice to,
Sure
hey,
is.
we're going to go on vacation. I don't have to let anyone know that we're not going to be there. I don't have to find a sub. I don't, hey, we stayed up late last night. We can just sleep in. It's easier to not have that. But when you feel cared for, and then the next layer is I'm actually making a difference in the ministry. And that's something we've seen with our training as well. We've had folks who were in there who maybe serve once a month or every other week, and then they realize the importance of relationship to actually transforming a child's life. And I thought I was just being a warm body in the room so you didn't have to close down childcare. I didn't realize that I could actually change an 8-year-old's life. Well, I need to be here every week. I can't just pop in and out every other week. They need to know that I'm going to be here. They need to trust that I'm going to be in this space for them. And then I can follow up. Hey, last week you said this. How is that going? Or I've been praying for you all week. So there's that piece as well. I'm actually making a difference. I'm cared for at a deep level. Food is a big one. If you have kids, and I've saw this a lot. If you've got young kids and you're serving and you have to get to church early, it's hard to get breakfast made. It might be, put some Cheerios in a bag. It's hard to get out the door and get someplace with your kids. Sometimes that's sacrificed. And one of the pastors that we visited, she would go in early every week and she would make pancakes for all the leaders and their kids. And I think there were some kids coming from the community that got bussed in early, and then they would come in, so they had breakfast too. But I think the primary focus was the leaders and the kids would come in, and she would say, they can't take care of our kids, or we need to take care of our volunteers so they can take care of our kids. And so they'd walk in being greeted with a warm breakfast that she herself was right there. And you think, well, isn't there more important things that the children's, it was a decent sized church, not huge, not a mega church, but decent size that she could be doing. But she felt that if I take my time to make pancakes, the message that is not just meeting the physical need, which was real, but the message that came across to the volunteers, you are worth so much. You having a full tummy, your children. I've seen churches on the other side where, well, we have snacks for the leaders, but not your kids. I'm like, well, my kids are the one who are complaining. I could tough it out, but I'm responsible for my own children. So my children, their needs are met. My family's needs are met. My mornings are always smoother. And there's someone smiling and praying for me and giving me a plate of pancakes. The tone that set, the message that sent to them, just sent ripples throughout the entire ministry. It was unbelievably powerful.
Well, I know you have a whole chapter because I've read your book several times. Thank you very much. And you do have a chapter, as you said, on leaders. You could write a whole book on this. I mean, the ideas you're giving, and you said you don't want to just do a standard script, and you don't. That would be, but you just named the elements. Like you're caring for them and noticing what they're good at, and then you're casting vision about what a difference they can make, and then you're following up with them. How did it go? And then you're giving them some pancakes, and not just for them, but for their kids. I mean,
just
I think
saying thank you. I heard that a lot. People would say, I'm told thank you every single time I serve. It could just be in passing, thank you, Mark. And one guy he was laughing about it because he's been serving for 15, 20 years at this church. He's like, I'm here every Sunday and Wednesday for decades. He said, how could I not be here? And yet every single time, thank you for being here, thank you for doing this, not taking them for granted. Because when someone feels like they're being taken for granted, it's easy. Well, my commitment is up. Maybe this is the time to take a break. Versus every single time I'm here, it matters that I'm here. It matters to the leadership. It matters to the kids. You know what? I can continue to serve. I want to see. My kids are. I'm working with third graders. They're going into fourth grade next year. I want to continue on that journey with them. I've seen how much they've grown. I want to continue to grow with them. I can't. How could I step away and not be part of these kids' life for another year? It just changes the whole dynamic when there's that buy-in and that connection and the genuine relationship with the children, and having the leader feel like a friend and a confidant, and someone that really really has my back. If there's a problem, they're there. A personal problem, a ministry problem. I know they're there for me. I know I'm safe. I know I'm there. I trust them. They trust me. Of course I'm going to want to serve. How can I not?
Right. And I just want to, brag on you for a minute. I have been out of town with you and your wife, Lori, and you have taken just awful late night flights so you can be back in church the next day with your group of boys.
Well, yeah, that's true. We're ironically, we're actually on a break right now, Lori and I. But we work with the group through the way our ministry is set up. We have we're volunteers. We're not running the ministry. A preteen ministry that's fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, which I think is just a fantastic bracket of ages. And so we started with a group of fourth graders. Our daughter was going into fourth grade. This was a few months after COVID. And we jumped in and we were there, and they're, well, every other week. I'm like, well, we're not going to be here every other week. Our kids are every week. The kids are every other week, or every week. Like, we're going to be here every week. And so we jumped in, and my wife was working with the girls. I was working with the boys. And, we started building that foundation. In my experience, it takes about 8 months to start to connect with a group of kids, like to really feel a sense of bonding. I know that because a lot of kids are there once a month. 8 months might mean I've spent 8 hours with them over the course of the school year. So it takes a long time to feel that trust. And so you go into that next year. So I go into fifth grade with them, and now we have traditions, right? You have to be a year to have a yearly tradition. So now we have traditions. Now we have routines down. Our routine is becoming more sophisticated as we check in with the group. It's not just a thumbs up, thumbs down, but now it's more nuanced. They feel safer. And then you get into sixth grade, and it's like they're like family. Like, they feel like family at that point. And so we would schedule our vacations around Sundays. We travel for conferences and mission trips, and so all of our traveling was Monday to Saturday. And if we were going to miss a Sunday, it's okay. Well, we'll leave on a Monday or Sunday evening, and then we'll come back on a Saturday, and exactly, go on a trip, roll in the middle of the night, and then I've got to be there because they're expecting me, and I want to be there for them. I got to find out how Nathan's karate tournament went, right? I need to know how's that bullying situation with so and so, and this kid's going through a divorce. What's happening with him? We can't just blow this off. They feel like family.
Well, I so appreciate your commitment, and I love the stories of your little group of guys. And I know that both you and I believe that the church should be they should be an example to everybody about being a safe place for all kids to belong and contribute. And you found well, you know what, let's go to this question. You found in your research that's not the case, right? In a lot of churches?
That's not the norm. That's not the norm. I off the top of my head, I would ballpark maybe 5% are kind of essentially inclusive for kids from this background. I don't want to report that number as a research finding, but kind of a rough personal approximation. I say maybe 1 out of 20 is more or less capable of effectively receiving a child with a trauma background, a child where they're having elevated behavioral and emotional problems. There are a lot of kids who are struggling with trauma who don't have behavior problems, and so their needs are not being met. We just don't notice them because they're not causing a problem. So I'm not, so there maybe most of the churches, they're not getting kicked out, but they're also not being really being ministered to. But those who a child could walk in, have a big emotional outburst, throw something, use profanity, take a swing at a leader or something like that, where it's not going to be, yeah, there's zero tolerance, you're gone, or strike one, strike two, you're out of here. A lot of churches are still using three strikes, which is extraordinarily antiquated discipline model that totally ignores the needs of the child, totally ignores the underlying feelings. It's usually based on behaviorism, the idea of punishment and reward. So we want to reinforce good behavior, punish bad behavior. And so if the child's trying to get attention, we're going to ignore it. And, if the child is acting out, we're going to punish it. And for a typically developing child, rewards is very effective. Tickets, if you have a group that's not struggling and you walk around and say, okay, everyone who's quiet, you're passing out tickets, they're going to be little angels. But a child who's really struggling may not have the capacity to behave in the way you're asking. They may not be emotionally capable of doing that for different reasons. Maybe they're on edge, a child in foster care, and they found out they're going to be changing placements later that day, and they don't know where they're going to be sleeping that night. They're not going to concentrate on your lesson. They can't. So it could be an unreasonable expectation we have. Maybe there's even a power struggle that happens. We have to remember, like, child abuse is not uncommon. If you have a decent sized ministry, there are children in there who have been abused or are being abused emotionally, maybe physically or sexually. For them, an adult who is taking, authoritative or certainly authoritarian adult is going to be threatening to them. And when adults in charge and when they're out of control, bad things happen to them. And so you take, I'm the adult and I'm in charge and you need to this and this, that could put them into fight or flight. And their brain's saying, danger, 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 danger. Someone's going to hurt you and you need to protect yourself. And so this idea of reward and punishment completely ignores the possibility that a child is protecting themselves from you. And your job is to help them feel safe, not to overpower them, which is going to simply escalate the problem. And some people will... go ahead, sorry.
No, please go ahead, Robert.
Well, I was going to say too, like some folks will say, well, we don't have any of these issues in our church. It doesn't need to be on our radar. So there are kids who are under your radar who are struggling, who aren't acting out. But also, if you don't have kids coming into your church who have struggles or who are dealing with trauma and these things, that might be another question as to why. Is your church a welcoming place to parents and families, foster families, who are walking through a tough times, or does the parent even receive the message on the front end, this is not a place for you? That could be socioeconomic. You have a high SES church, socioeconomic status church, in a family, maybe they live in a back house down the street and they were homeless and, a benevolent family welcomed them in, and you're the church right down the street from them, and they walk in and they're on government assistance or they're working several jobs just to make ends meet. And they, the single mom shows up at a women's Bible study. Does she feel like a complete outcast because, everyone looks at her and starts making really ill-informed suggestions about how she should be handling problems that they can never relate to, and so her kid never makes it into your ministry. So we almost want to ask broader questions. Really? There are no kids in your ministry who are struggling? Why is that? Right? The world is struggling. Or you go out in the world is struggling. So why are you not, either you're tone deaf and you're not aware of it, or we're not reaching the world in some way. And so maybe that's a time to be introspective and say, okay, let's talk to Jesus and say, is there someone that we're missing? Is there someone that God really has put on our doorstep or that we should be reaching out to? Outreach, right? There's kind of a model of outreach that is, we're going to go out there, minister to them out there, and then come back to the safety of our walls. So we'll go to the bad neighborhood and we'll go to the park and pass out hot dogs. We'll barbecue hamburgers and hot dogs and invite them to church. And then we'll go back and maybe we go there once a month, but we don't treat them as part of our community, our church community. And the churches I saw that did effective outreach, they didn't draw a line and say, well, this is us and that is them. If they're ministering to them, they have equal status in our church. And so if one of them can't make it to something because they don't have a right or there's a financial need, we're not going to say, well, it's one of the community. It's now our responsibility to meet that need because they're part of our family. So anyways, those would be some broader questions we could ask if we really think we don't have trauma in our ministry.
Right. Yeah, we do. I mean, yeah, with all that kids have experienced, we do. And yeah, you're right. If we don't think we do, then there's another issue. There's more questions that need to be answered. You know, your book and your workshops really, because I was thinking of asking the question, okay, a church wants to be better at this. What should they do? And I think what they should do is they need to start educating themselves, right? Like, what would you say? What's the first step to be better at this?
Yeah. So that's why we stepped into this space. We did all this research. I'm an academic, right? So the research, I have all these academic articles that a children's pastor typically is not going to read. You know, when I go to a children's pastor conference, there are not a line of people waiting for me to autograph the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychology. There was one at the last one. It was very gratifying. I read your articles. Which one? They're naming these, but that's not the norm. So we thought, well, how do we bring this message to people who can actually use it? So that was the book. And then the book was written for leadership. So I would say to the leader, start there, you know, get the book. It's on Amazon. It's not crazy expensive as far as things go these days. It's worth the investment. Read through that and then decide, is this what I want my church to look like? You know, there could be someone who looks at the book and says, this is not for me. Now, I might have deep theological and philosophical objections to that conclusion, but if you at the leadership level say that this is not for me, then you know, I don't see any point in going further. There'll be conflict in your ministry. But if you look at that and you say, yes, I want a church that a child from the community who is a non-Christian family who is struggling with severe behaviors or anywhere in between can walk in and feel loved and succeed. And I'm willing to accept the fact this is going to be messy and hard, and some people aren't going to like it. This is not an easy thing. There could be a family that leaves the church because of this. There could be a volunteer who's not willing to take the risk. Although we found that typically people are when they have the full picture. Then that's where our training comes in. And so I have a background in instructional design, and so there's an entire team of people who are just great at this who collaborated. And so these are these self-guided workshops. One of the bottlenecks is bringing in trainers. It's expensive, and there's not a lot of people teaching on this. So we'll get away from that. And it's a curriculum. There's videos. There's workbooks for the volunteers. There's a manual. You just kind of read. It's really straightforward. Say this. Click the button to start the video. Say this to start the timer. Here's the activity. It's all interactive. There's no lecture. You don't have to really know much at all to lead it. So anyway, there's 4 of these. They're 75 minutes each. And I think the ideal model is you do one a quarter, and now you have a year's worth of training, and a lot of them will then loop so they can reach the new volunteers and reinforce it. So you tell people, I hate the word mandatory, but we really, really, really think you should be at this training. Here's all we're going to ask of you this quarter. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what this is. Here's why I think it's important for you to be there. We're going to give you pizza or sandwiches or whatever your people like to eat. Give us an hour and a half after church. And once they go through the first one, right, you'll see a church went through it, and they had an evening service that night. It was Saturday afternoon or morning they did it, which I don't think is the best time. I think Sunday after church is better, but they did it on Saturday morning, and that evening they had an evening service, and the pastor got a text from one of the volunteers. Hey, I used the thing from the workshop, and here's what happened. So they start to see it working, and it's fun. It's a fun trauma training. It kind of feels weird to put it that way. And then they talk to the volunteer who didn't come. You weren't there. You missed out. And then they say, well, are you going to do a makeup training? People get invested, and then over the year, they go through each of these. So the first one's a foundation. What is trauma? What are these categories? What's a general framework for responding? The second is discipline strategies. So walking them through, here's a step-by-step approach. Okay, the kid just had a meltdown and threw something and called me a nasty name. Now what? Right. So how to go through that at a very approachable level. We have one on teaching. So how does trauma affect the learning environment and the kid's ability to learn? What are
Mm-hmm.
strategies we can use to overcome those obstacles? The last one's on small group. How do I lead a small group where kids have a safe place to be vulnerable and to have their emotional and spiritual relational needs met, so that someone again who doesn't have this background of, we don't need to be a psychologist, you don't need to be a therapist, a teacher, where you can come in with an open mind and open heart and see measurable change. We ran studies on these measurable
Right.
change in kids' lives in the ministry.
Yeah, it's excellent. And it is fun because it's so interactive. I mean, you're up, you're moving around, you're doing things with other
Hmm.
people, you're hearing what other people have to say. Yeah, I highly
Sure.
recommend it. Uh, Robert, as we finish up, I just want to ask you, we're going to do some rapid fire questions, okay? Just quick.
Sure.
You ready?
Hmm.
What's your favorite way to encourage a child?
A favorite way to encourage a child. I think to call out something you've seen in them specifically, that when so and so shared this in small group, I saw you ask them this question, and then I saw you
Yes.
pay attention to them as they answered it, and that made Mason feel cared for and that he was valued in this group. And I'm really glad you were here, because if you weren't, he would not have received that ministry this morning.
Yeah, specific encouragement. So good. Um, you live in California, but still, what's your dream vacation?
Oh boy, I love camping and I love being out away from everything to kind of get that space. So probably backpacking
Hmm.
off in the the wilderness, or just kind of see national parks when they're not crowded. Just kind of being away from
Right.
things I love.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
What are three words to describe yourself?
Oh my goodness. Um, I was not prepared for these questions.
That's
Let's
all right. That's
see.
part of the fun.
I tend to think about things. So contemplative, and definitely, I really believe in sort of trying to bring out. I don't want to say perfectionist because that's negative connotations, but try to see good in people and things, and bring those
Hmm.
things out. Um, and then, oh my goodness, so on the spot. At least I won't say quick thinking.
You,
Yeah.
well, you did good. I think
Yeah, we'll go
contemplative,
with that. Is that
and
yeah?
I would give your second one. I think that's an encourager. You've encouraged me, Robert. I
Mm,
think you are a great encourager. Encouragement is calling out the best in people,
hmm.
and you do that on the regular. Now, finish this thought. Every child.
Oh, and that was it. That
Oh, that's it. Every
every
child.
child has value.
Yes, yes. And through your work, you help so many of us see that, because sometimes the behavior is so big in front of our face, we miss the fearfully and wonderfully made kid behind it. So, we've talked about your workshop. What is the best way for people to find the amazing resources that you have?
Yeah, sure. Our website. We try to get everything set up there, where it's easy to access. So reachhurtingkids.com. So it's one word, reachhurtingkids.com. And on there, you'll find the workshop. So the workshop is just called the Reach Hurting Kids Workshop. There's a cost for that. That's the only way we support the ministry. That's our funding source to go to conferences and create resources and do these things. So there's a cost, but it's well worth the investment.
I
So you'll
agree.
find that there. There's some information about the book, and that's also, if you Google the phrase trauma informed children's ministry, probably 8 of the 10 hits on Google will somehow be connected to what we're doing.
Which
But the
usually
book
pops
as
up
well.
at the top. Yeah.
It's yeah, yeah.
um, a great work on that. And I've had the pleasure of being able to collaborate with you guys on a number of things. And I just, I appreciate that your work is science based, it's evidence based, but then it's also very practical for
Yeah,
someone who is
one of our
not.
key values is collaboration, because
Yeah.
what makes the book and the knowledge in that and the workshops so great is I didn't sit down. Even the three of us in our core team didn't sit down and just dream this up. I'm not a pastor. I did some internship work back in the day, but it's because it's drawing from the experience and wisdom and insight and contributions of dozens and dozens of people who have just been blessed and they're talented and God's anointed them in this and they're speaking into it. From scientists, one of our collaborators, cognitive developmental, psychologist who's top in her field, and from the pastors, the mental health people, theologians, all these people have spoken into it. And so what I did was I organized their thoughts and I wrote it clearly. And quickly, right? For the first draft of the book was 700 pages, and the final you'll see is 200. That was my cap. So that's what I contributed, was organizing the thoughts and writing them clearly. But they're not my ideas; they're from people, so many people who are just beyond gifted in this, including yourself.
Well, it's thank you. It's very accessible. And I believe that it's very, very important, a very important resource for the church. So, Robert, thank you so much. Bless you and your team, Lori and Kayla, on your work. And I look forward to collaborating with you. Oh, in less than a month. I was going to say soon.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Okay. But thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kim. I appreciate it.